How's it going, guys? Val here. Welcome to another Pandora Rising video. Today's video is going to be covering some basic combat tips. The first one I'm going to start with is going to be an offensive tip, and that is going to be starting a push and where you should be placing your units at the beginning of a fight. So typically at the start of a battle, you don't want to be dropping units as soon as you can. You want to wait till your bar is pretty full, just so that once you've got units on the ground, you still have energy for a counterplay. So I've set these sort of chessboard up, if you will. This took me quite a long time to get figured out and created. But let's take a first look here. So this is something I see pretty often, which is people dropping units right at the front. Do not do that, especially with low energy, because people are going to counterplay you instantly. Where you should be placing them is actually more towards the back, if not on the back wall. Once those units are down, they'll start advancing, and you want to look for a counterplay from your opponent. And then what you're going to do is respond to that counterplay with your own counter, essentially, to that counter. So, depending on what you've got up front, like a Guardian or a Titanothere, a Dire Horse Rider, any of that kind of stuff, you're going to want to respond with something that's able to deal with what the opponent has put down to deal with your initial threat. So the tanks, you typically want to wait until they get far enough ahead and then use your units behind it. And then in the example of the fire thrower in the top lane, you want to let it push up, but not all the way to the deployment line, which is that sort of neon blue line. Because if he gets all the way up there and your opponent counterplays him, you're not going to have the space to like squeeze a tank or a heavier unit in there. So he's probably going to end up getting killed. And that goes for more than just the fire thrower. Any of the sort of less healthy, nimble, or faster moving attack units will get chewed up pretty quickly if they don't have something essentially blocking for it. So let's take a quick peek at this in action. So you're going to see I've got my War Beast. Now I'm not dropping it right away, I'm actually waiting for my energy to get close enough for me to drop another unit before he gets to the sort of center point or the deployment line. So we get a Ripper down, I've got my Stingback Collar pushing up behind, and I'm just letting my energy fill. There's no sense just building a big push for no reason. You'll see the Heeelldozer come down, so I drop my Stingbat Swarm up there. And another thing to just note is my units are not all stacked on top of each other. Doing that can also be detrimental. And there we go, an easy one push win. So the next push type that I want to talk about is something that I call a baited split push. Now there's a couple ways to initiate this. The first way I would suggest, which is typically the cheaper route, is to send a fast unit from the back of your base across the board. So something like a Forest Banshee, you want them to push up as fast as they can to allow your deployment line to move up towards your opponent's towers. Now, as your fast unit is moving up, your opponent is likely going to play something. Otherwise, they're probably sitting at max energy at this point, which is basically a waste. Typically, you want to put down something a little bit on the tanky side, whether it's a Guardian or a War Beast. You could technically use a Titanothere, although that is a significant amount of energy. You even could, depending on how far your deployment line moves up, throw down a building there. Now, there are reasons not to put a building that far up the lane, which I'll get into in our defensive combat video. But for now, the split push, once you've got your deployment line far enough ahead and your opponent responds, what you want to do is throw something in the opposing lane, typically that ignores units. This will likely allow you to at least get a few hits in, potentially even killing the opponent's towers. So that's going to depend heavily on how hard they react to your initial push. So let's take a quick peek at this in action. So I'm going to start with my champion back here, and I'm immediately countered with an amp. So I follow up with a Stingback Collar, and this is going to allow me to build up Stingbats on this amp. And you'll notice there's another amp coming. So I've decided I'm going to split push this and actually send a War Beast top. Now you can see the first turret there is already targeting my champion, so I actually decided to throw a Forest Banshee down. Now attacking this tower with the Forest Banshee and the War Beast is basically uncontested. And then again, an easy one push victory. So the last thing I'm going to cover in this video is counter pushing. Counter pushing kind of goes hand in hand with defense, but I'm going to cover the more offensive side of it. So let's just imagine for a sec, you have a Titanothere coming from the opposing player's end. So depending on what you have in your hand, you've got to decide how you're going to counterplay this, and if you want to turn it into an offensive push. So the best tool for that would be something like the Viper Wolf Den, because not only is the Titanothere going to target this building, you're also spawning new units to help you start a push. Another option for counterplays for something like this, especially a unit that ignores troops, would be something like the Forest Banshee, or a Stingbat Swarm, or even Banshee Flight. So if we have Banshee Flight in here, it's an equal energy trade, which is not really ideal. You're trying to get the most value out of the least amount of energy. So in my opinion, the Viper Wolf Den would be better here, but depending on how far they let their Titanothere push up without dropping another unit, you may end up getting countered on your end if they drop something like a Fire Thrower or a group of archers. Anyways, once you've killed the incoming unit, you're very likely going to want to drop, again, a tank up in front of your units before they start pushing over your deployment line. Now, once you've started this push, you can adjust accordingly. You can turn this into a potential split push. You may have to also counter in another lane, or you may need to start piling more counters into your counter push, depending on what your opponent is dropping. So we'll take a quick peek again at some footage, and you're going to see here that my initial push against the towers is just falling off. It's just dying. So I'm prepping to counter push. So I start with a Paradise Needler, and then I see the Helldozers come in. So I wait on the Forest Banshee, and I actually play the Stingbat Caller. And once again, this is going to let me start stockpiling or accumulating a swarm of Stingbats. So down goes my Forest Banshee. Now my Forest Banshee slowly creeps into turret range, but fortunately the Helldozers just ignore units, so they're going to keep pushing back, and my Forest Banshee is going to turn around. Now I drop a hunting party. So you see I have the War Beast. It's coming out now. I'm doing that because those are both almost dead, and I want my War Beast ahead of everyone else, because all my other units will slowly get picked off by that amp, and now the Shredder. So we've got the tower down. They're still dropping units, but at this point our push is so massive that it's kind of hard to deal with. The Shredder down there is basically irrelevant, or the Ripper down there. So there we go. There's another clear. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is this is not going to be the same in every situation. Obviously, the way you play is going to be affected by your current unit levels, your commander talent levels, what you're going up against, who you're going up against. These are just sort of generic overview, basic introductory guides to combat, and more specifically offensive combat in this video. I am planning on doing more advanced combat guides in the future, but as you can probably imagine, doing all of this editing like an animation video is quite time consuming. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you in the next video.